And so Wall's idea is that we're looking at two currents that came down and they spun into this, almost like a yin-yang symbol, and caused this to happen. And there's several other examples that the electric universe talks about that's similar to this. I don't remember this slide. We don't need it. So let's go away from cosmology. I just gave you, I just sampled the geology. There's really a lot more examples about electricity in the sky. We didn't even touch hardly on comets. Anyway, so electricity on Earth. Well, one thing that we don't ever really have told to us is that between the Earth and the ionosphere, there's a 300,000 volt voltage drop. And we don't take it into account. We know it's there, but obviously it must not do anything, right? Have you ever heard a weatherman tell you about the voltage difference between New York and Denver? No. We also know this breaks down into, it's about 350 volts from the bottom of your shoes to your head. Now, because we are basically liquid and we're a good conductor, it isn't really 350 volts from here because it's the same as here because I am a good conductor. So we have a field around us. And if you actually touch the Earth, then you become the same potential as the Earth. If you aren't touching the Earth and you're wearing shoes, and all of us probably have plastic shoes on right now, and we're standing on a wood floor, we are isolated from the ground. We are not at the potential of the Earth. We're floating. And when I walk by a TV set, it causes that to vary. And when I walk by a computer, it causes that to vary. If you connect yourself to the ground, believe me, that TV set's not going to change your voltage, because it would have to change the voltage of the Earth. And it's not going to happen. So the idea of earthing, this is getting a little off course, but the idea is he actually presented at a conference, James Sorensen, and I thought, well, this is just a big sales pitch for his electric sheets, and I have a mouse pad that's connected to the ground. So when I'm working at my computer, I'm connected to the ground. It costs $200. I mean, this is a big sales pitch. When I finally read his book, I was astounded. This is something I think you should all look into. It reduces arthritis. It causes your blood cells to become less clumpy. It gets rid of cortisol. It helps you with cortisol issues. There's a lot of evidence behind earthing as being a very healthy thing to do. But for the most part, most people have never heard of it. Yet we know these voltages exist. Now we do know that there's lightning, so I will give meteorologists credit for taking into account lightning. Their theory is that way down here, here's the lightning. And that water evaporates and it takes a charge up into the clouds. And therefore that lightning is being caused by evaporating water. So it's the result, it's not the cause, it's being caused by something else. However, when we actually move out a little way, we see that there are these blue jets that go way up into the sky. And we find these sprites and elves. And there's a lot of pictures on the web, they're pretty cool. They go way up into the sky. And they occur at the same time as the lightning strike. So how could this little event, this little local event in this cloud, cause that? And the electric universe believes that there's a solar wind coming from the sun. It's charged particles, a rain of charged particles. It's an electric current. And that this is the electricity trickling down to the surface of the Earth. And that's, the lightning is and that instead of the weather generating the lightning, the electric charge is powering the weather. So you could think about a hurricane. It's almost like a spiral bar galaxy. It's like a galaxy rotating there. What's powering it? What's making the thing turn? And the conventional belief is hot air and cold air mixing. And the Coriolis effect, which is the rotation of the Earth, those two combine together to create a hurricane. Well, I would say that what a hurricane really is it's an electric motor. It's being powered by this voltage difference that exists in the sky. And when they went out, they measured voltages on dust storms in the southwest, and they find hundreds and hundreds of volts around the dust storms. Of course, their interpretation is that the dust devils, that these dust devils are generating the voltage. And once again, I'd say it's the opposite. When you look at Mars, these dust devils go many, I think miles high. And we just recently went through an area where Mars had a huge dust storm, and these dust devils precede the dust storm, and they cover the entire planet. And Mars has 1/100th the atmosphere we have. I mean, it's almost no atmosphere at all. So it can't be really hot and cold air powering these things. And the belief is that these are electrically generated dust devils that are generating these rotating clouds, which would be tornadoes. If you remember with Helen Hunt, I think it was, and Twister, and they look up into the tornado, and you see all that lightning inside that tornado. That's powering the tornado. This place is kind of cool. I like this. They 150 nights a year, they get all these lightning strikes at this lake in Venezuela. It's just, I don't know what that means. But that is cool. So this is a gentleman that is unfortunately passed away now. He is just an amateur geologist, always had an enthusiasm in it. He's spoken at quite a few conferences. And he believed, he took Velikovsky's books and just interpreted them literally. Velikovsky thought that the Earth stopped, and that right now as the Earth rotates, that causes a 13-mile bulge in the oceans because of the centrifugal force. And if the Earth were to stop, all of a sudden that 13-mile tall bulge would run towards the poles. So he goes running around the southwest, and he's looking for massive amounts of water heading up north. What I really liked about him, he's a pioneer on the internet. He created videos. He got a lot of publicity with literally no money, no funding, and has put out all of his own theories, and it just really shows the power that we have with the internet to reach a lot of people. He gives examples of what's called welded tuft. This is molten basic rock that has melted and is solidified, and he shows that he believes that Velikovsky talks about brimstone and hail falling from heaven, and that it settled to cause fires everywhere. And it settled down, and that this is the windward side and this is the leeward side. And he goes through a lot of his videos and shows where this happened. And another favorite thing he did was, they always talk about basalt, which is deposited by volcanoes, and somehow this volcano filled up this valley and caused this basalt formation over here. Good echo. Caused this basalt formation over here, and now all this basalt in the middle has disappeared somewhere, and got washed away or something. And these theories are really hard to believe. And he points out again and again, he would go and talk to geologists, and they say, well, it's caused by a volcano over there by Rifle. And then he'd go look, but there's no volcano. They can't find these. So he's always talking about missing volcanoes all over the planet. And he says that it was these huge events that occurred, massive events. So Earth's magnetic field. One of the basic theories of our Earth is that we have a magnetic field being created by a rotating solid iron core. Or maybe it's semi-solid, or it changes as you read about the theory. But in order for this to rotate inside our Earth, we have to have a molten area around it. Because it supposedly rotates at a different speed than the actual Earth does. And that generates our magnetic field. So when I started looking into this, I thought, well, geez, they probably do this in high school where you get some metal, and you rotate it, and you create a magnetic field. This has got to be an experiment everyone's done, right? It's done in laboratories all over the world. We know all about this. Guess what? This is a they don't put the money in there. I'll call it $4 million. I think it's $4 million, 22 tons of molten sodium. That was done at the University of Maryland, and I don't have his name, Dan Lathrop. Dan Lathrop at the University of Maryland. This is his 4th generation. He's trying to figure out how to make a magnetic field by rotating molten metal. This was done about 7-8 years ago. I went on last night, I looked it up again. I can't find any results for his experiment. He hasn't published his results. Interesting. But that doesn't stop us. We got computer simulations. We know exactly how this works, even though we can't do it in a laboratory. So my point here is that the whole basis for our geology on Earth is based on this idea of the molten mantle and the solid core. Once you have a molten mantle, then you can have tectonic plates floating around it. You can have all kinds of other things, explain other things through it. I'm not saying tectonics is wrong. I'm just saying that that is like the core idea of our geology, that everything has to agree with. And we've never done it experimentally. So this is science, by the way. So a little more evidence. I really like this. This is another amateur astronomer. He likes to drive around the Southwest and take pictures. And what he found is these triangular buttresses. And what's interesting about them, well, here's one, here's three. Here's one, and it kind of breaks apart, and you get 7. And you see these formations like this where they break into harmonics. Now, if water is eroding, there's no way to explain how water could erode into harmonics. So for those who know what harmonics is, it's a wave. A harmonic of a wave is a wave with a frequency that is a positive integer multiple of the frequency of the original wave. So the original wave's here, and this is 3. That's an integer multiple. And there's some other examples. This one breaks into 2. So the idea here is that this thing did not form over millions of years. This thing formed practically instantaneously. And it was probably some kind of a blast. He thinks it's an electric arc that hit the planet, caused this blast to go out, and it just laid down these mountains with these harmonics. Here's an example of a circular one. You can see the same triangular buttresses all around it. A little bit more detail of it over there. It's really, really, really hard to explain this using conventional geology. So if we go to the planets, now on Earth we say we have wind erosion, water erosion, volcanoes, tectonics, and earthquakes. And that's about it. That's pretty much what shapes our geology. But if you go to, this is Valles Marineris again. This gives you a better idea how big it is. Once again, the Grand Canyon is about that big. They're trying to figure out what that is. Is that water erosion? Is that an old stream bed? Well, that's a stream bed many, 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 many times bigger than the Grand Canyon. Is that a volcano, volcanic tubes that collapsed? They really don't know what it is. And what they find is that crisscrossing. So you'll get a pattern here like this, and then a pattern that crosses it, and it seems to ignore the underlying topology. So this top pattern will go down the valley, up the other side, across the mountaintop. This pattern just cuts right through the geology. It's not follow. If it's water, it's going to follow the existing geology. But this just ignores the existing geology. Here's another example of big, huge striations going across Enceladus. It's the moon. What causes these big, big lines to form? It doesn't look like wind erosion to me. This is thought to be electricity wrapping this planet and causing the electric discharge machining. This is where the plasma comes down and pulls material away. We're also finding this hourglass shape. Most of the comets we're looking at have this hourglass shape, and they really don't understand why it's peanut shaped. We see the peanut shape in the center of our galaxy. This is part of the natural property of electricity, is that it breaks things apart into 2. This is 67P. I think that's Holmes. And if it is, the Holmes comet actually was when it came through our solar system, it suddenly expanded out to be the largest object in the solar system. It got to be bigger than the sun for about 4 days. And then it shrunk back. And what is that? Is that water coming off the planet? What the electric universe believes is that this charged body, this comet, went through a Birkeland current. And the Birkeland current blew it up into this size, but bigger than the sun. The largest object in our solar system for just a couple of days. And this is a teeny tiny little comet. I mean, it's inconsequential even to the size of the Earth, and the Earth is small compared to the size of the sun. So there's a lot of unexplained phenomena that electricity can't explain. Oh, and also you see these jets coming off. These jets are thought to be volcanoes, but they happen to move. Especially the ones on Io, I know they're moving around the planet. These are plasma jets. They're electrical. They're not some kind of underwater geyser or a volcanic thing. I think I have a picture here. Well, it might come back. we can see how on Enceladus, it actually imprints itself on Saturn. And Saturn, I think it's Saturn's atmosphere. I don't know if I have that slide in here. We also see lights right before earthquakes. Is there some kind of a electrical thing going on in the generation of earthquakes that we aren't aware of? Oh, this takes us back to Mars. And once again, we see this, as I said, the Grand Canyon is very small compared to this. And you see these scalloped edges, and these scalloped edges are real common in the electric universe. And I'll show you some experiments later where they're trying to repeat these in laboratories using electrostatics. But Valles Marineris is an anomaly. We really don't get what it is. Just go back to Velikovsky. Velikovsky concluded that Venus was in an elliptical orbit, and it threatened our planet every 52 years. And so people worshipped it and sacrificed virgins and everything to make sure it wouldn't happen again. And they went underground. They built structures to protect themselves because this was a recurring event. And then Venus got into a war with Mars. And the two of them threw thunderbolts at each other and had a big fight. And Venus got thrown into its current orbit where it is now. And then Mars then became this elliptical planet. And Mars is the Ares, it's the planet of war. And again and again and again, you can find the female god and the male god fighting. And we now interpret both of these gods to be the planets. And so how could they have fought? Supposedly Venus has never changed its orbit in 5 billion years, and Earth's never changed, and Mars never changed. And the reason we believe this is the mathematics of gravity cannot explain to us how an elliptical orbit can turn into a circular orbit. Because Venus is pretty much a circular orbit, Mars is a circular orbit. What in the world would cause that change? And so Velikovsky's conclusion was that electrical tail I showed you at the very beginning coming out Venus, if it touches another planet, the two planets change charge, and that changes the orbits of both planets. So that was Velikovsky's conclusion. Whether he's right about that, there's a lot of debate. He gets into really detailed descriptions of what happened in the Exodus and the pillar of fire and the parting of the Red Sea, and based on this whole story. It's good reading. I think you should, if you want to really scare yourself, read Worlds Included. Olympus Mons, this is massive. If you look at the Earth, or the United States, that's how big Olympus Mons is. And then these are 3 other ones that are very close, and they're huge. I mean, in the state of Washington, we got like 6 or 7 volcanoes here on Earth that line up right here. This thing's bigger than all of them combined. And not only that, but it seems to have a moat. We know that it's the elevation is less around the edge than it is further out. And it also has this incredibly sharp face on it. And then at the top, we get this crater kind of looking thing. So the theory is that Mars and Earth were close, or Venus, or something, were close enough together that an electric thunderbolt, they're charged bodies, they have electric charge, passed between the 2 planets, and when it did, it carved out Valles Marineris. If the electricity is going one way, if the electricity is coming back that way, it just sucked up all this dirt and created Valles. This is the tallest known mountain in the solar system right here. And it was actually due to an electric drawing together of all this material into this mountain. And we see at the top, once again, we have the very, very flat surface. This is similar to craters. They're very flat. They're not dome-shaped. We have the very sharp edge. We see some scalloping going on. And this is thought to be where the charge lifted up and came back down a couple times before it ended. And that this thing right here, is right there, is actually part of a scar caused by a large thunderbolt. I kind of discussed the craters a little bit earlier. We always, in the electric universe, always thought this would be the thing that would really make modern science pay attention, but they don't. But once again, you can see we have the craters on the edge. It actually might be the same picture, come to think of it. Here's a drawing of what this might have looked like at the time. As it turns out, electricity will usually go in perpendicular. It won't come in at an angle. And it causes, well, you saw the pictures of electric discharge machining where it edged straight down. So that's thought to be what's causing craters. Here's this is called it's a little white spot on it's a little light. These have been observed for a long time, and science said now that can't happen. And finally someone took a picture and now they agree. But this might actually be a crater in formation, right there. Here we see we see the edge crater. We see another edge crater. You see the scalloping. Now either this was a sedimentary formation, which means an ocean had to have been there one time. This is on the moon. Chances are there was no ocean on the moon at one time. This is another principle of electricity, is to cause these concentric circles. And then this formation that looks like kind of like dunes in the middle is another thing that we found can be created in the laboratory using electricity. So the idea here is most of our craters, if not all of them, are electrically formed, including the one in the Meteor Crater in Arizona. I don't know if you've been there, but it follows a lot of the same properties where it's pretty much flat on the bottom with sharp edges, and they can't find all the material. Where did the material go? It had to have been blasted out right around the area, and they can't find it. What they do find is that it's reversed. So if you have a layer of, I don't know what it's made of, limestone and chalk, over here it's going to be chalk and limestone. So it's like it pulls off the chalk and lays it down as the lowest level. So the highest level becomes the lowest level. And then the next level gets laid on top of it, and the next level on top of it. But once again, the amount of material around the crater is insufficient to account for the size of the crater. Now here's a cool one. These are called Bullseye Craters. So the theory is that an asteroid hit, and it rebounded and created a peak, and then 1,000 years later, another asteroid managed to hit dead center. And it did it twice, right next to each other. And this is much more easy to explain with electricity pulling up and coming back down into the highest point. And these are found all over. I think this picture is actually on Mars. Of course, all of our pictures on Mars are nicely redly tinted. If you actually look at the real pictures, they aren't red, but that's NASA helping us understand their theories. Here's the picture of Enceladus. So I showed the picture of the jets coming off of Enceladus. And this is NASA. NASA says this. They found that this is leaving an imprint in the atmosphere of Saturn. So how could a geyser over here cause an imprint over here? And this is an electrical connection between the two. I had to get into global warming, though. So I don't know if you know the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is it's trace gas. It's almost none. It's like 0.0436 or 36%. So there's hardly any carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And of the carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, I think termites create 8 times more carbon dioxide than humans do. So if we're going to stop carbon dioxide, we should be wiping out the termites. And water is 20 times more of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So why are we even paying attention to carbon dioxide? So I do believe the planet's changing, no doubt. Climate's changing. We're headed into a cold spell. This way. That's my guess. Actually, there's a bunch of people in the electric universe saying that. We're headed into a cold spell. And what happened back, Galileo discovered the telescope, and he started counting sunspots. And as he's counting the sunspots, they went away. And this is a graph of temperature over the same period of time. The Thames River froze, a bunch of people died, Europe had a really hard time. And then all of a sudden, about 70 years later, they started seeing sunspots again, and the temperature went up. And then now we're using a little bit different method, but now the sunspots are decreasing and the temperature went down. They call that the Dalton minimum. We're now heading along, the temperature's okay, and here we are. We're a little bit warmer than we used to be. And I think we're headed into the Eddy minimum. Some guy named Eddy, I've never read his theory, but I heard about the guy. But we're headed into another period. Right now our sun is quiescent. It is quiet. They are shocked at how quiet our sun is and at how few sunspots are on our sun. So, I guess we'll have to wait and see, huh? But once again, this is more of the electrical effect coming from the sun than it is from man burning whatever it is we burn, carbon gases or carbon fuels. And also, the sun is a light bulb on a wire. So we mentioned that if the sun is flickering, it could be caused by an external thing. So we have an 11-year sunspot cycle. And once again, science has a hard time figuring out how a nuclear fusion reactor can cause an 11-year sunspot cycle. But if it's electrical, you can imagine it's part of a circuit, and it's really simple in electronics to build what's called a relaxation oscillator. It's what a lot of our radio waves are generated with. And it's a very simple circuit involving a resistor and a capacitor. And it could be that that 11-year cycle is being caused by a variation in some other star system that's far, far, far away, has this circuit going on, and it's causing our sun to flicker. An 11-year cycle isn't a very fast flicker. If you look at quasars, quasars are thought to be way at the edge of the universe. They're quasi-stellar objects. We're not sure what they are. It might be a galaxy. They're so far away, we really can't tell what they are, supposedly, according to the redshift theory, but we already talked about that. But these things they think it's a light, like a lighthouse. And it's spinning around, and we see it flash, and we see it flash. And so these are huge, massive objects, putting out much more power than our entire galaxy, as I mentioned earlier, supposedly. Well, what if it's not a rotating thing? And they're rotating so fast, they found them out to 10,000 revolutions. This thing would have to be rotating 10,000 times a minute. Unbelievable speed to hold a massive object together. It could be it's just a flickering light bulb. It's just hooked up to an electric circuit and it's just flickering. And it's a very simple circuit to create that. Okay. So I mentioned earlier the Lakota Indians talked about the thunderbirds coming down and throwing their biggest thunderbolts and wiping out the mountains, and all the bones were strewn all about. That's how I started this whole speech. This is in South Dakota. This is where the Lakota Indians were. And what they found is in a very, very small area, it's I believe 100 feet across, they're finding remains of mastodons. And they're fossilized. They're petrified. So there's really two stages. Fossilization you can think of as it's a first stage of something turning, or we find a lot of fossils that still have a lot of carbon in them. Whereas petrified objects have no carbon. And the belief is that this carbon life form died, and then it had to get covered up really quickly so no oxygen could get to it. And then slowly over millions or thousands of years, water with minerals, calcium and silicon, soaked through the carbon, the dead body, and replaced the carbon with calcium. So this calcium, the carbon was replaced over a long period of time, and it just did a really good job, because you can cut these things apart and you can still see their internal organs inside their bodies. So this replacement process was an extremely accurate process, especially given that these things should have decayed within the first 10 years, or first year. So how did they last thousands and thousands? And this gentleman, Peter Mungo-Jump, he just put out a great video. His theory is that somehow the carbon was transmuted into calcium. Now, this is not supposed to happen on Earth. The elements do not change into other elements on Earth. That happens in supernovas, that happens in the center of stars under extremely, remember ITER, the reactor, extremely high pressure, extremely high temperature. This does not happen on Earth. But what they also found is that this thing, when they carve this out, they can hardly tell the difference, other than a little bit of color, between the surrounding rock and the petrified bones. And so it's almost like this whole area, this 100 and some foot by 100 foot little area, small area, the entire area turned from a living organism and water into solid rock. So he's proposing that we have instant fossilization, the transmutation of elements. And so I heard this guy speak a year and a half ago. I've been working on the structured atom model with a gentleman from the Netherlands. And we're driving home from the conference and we're watching the solar eclipse through the sunroof of the car. As we're driving along, we go, so what are we going to do next year? We just did the first speech about this theory. Well, and we realized that transmutation had been brought up multiple times. I mentioned the sapphire equipment, where they're getting 34 elements out and they're only putting one in. We had Peter Mungo-Jump talk about transmutation. And we realized we had to figure out from the structure of the nucleus of the atom transmutation. And so we've now spent the last year looking into transmutation. Believe me, it's happening everywhere. Chickens transmute potassium into calcium. You take calcium away from a chicken, it still lays a calcium egg. You take potassium away from the chicken also, and the egg shells start getting soft. So somehow the chicken is converting potassium into calcium. A really cool one, I'm getting a little off course, but I have a couple extra minutes.
Not much left.
Well, yeah. A real interesting one is desert workers are on hot steel platforms. They're in 120-degree heat. They're under the sunlight. They're wearing work clothes. They're working. They're generating heat. Now, the belief is we perspire, and that's what cools our bodies off. But if you take the amount of water they drink, the amount of water they pee out, and you assume the rest is all evaporated, it doesn't come close to explaining why they don't die of heat. And so what he found out is that if he gives these workers sodium, no, it's potassium. If he gives the workers potassium, they secrete more sodium. He believes potassium is being transmuted by the human body into sodium. And now I said earlier that all these reactions, nuclear reactions, are trying to get heat. This is the reverse. This is an endothermic reaction. It's like having a reverse microwave in your body that's sucking heat out of you. And it just turns the potassium into sodium, and you suddenly don't die, because you now have this air conditioner built in. And there's a bunch more examples, and I'll get to that kind of in a second. Okay, so I'm going to go way out on a limb, because I haven't yet. Right? The dinosaurs died 65 million years ago. When I was in school, I remember very clearly my teachers telling us that the brontosaurus, and I think actually there is no brontosaurus anymore, I think they call it a brachiosaurus, but whatever. The brontosaurus must have lived in swamps because they were so big they could not have lived on ground. And we still wonder how pterodactyls managed to fly in the sky. They're not a very efficient flying machine. So, the theory of we really don't know what gravity is. There's no one in here, I think, that has an, I might. No one here has an explanation for gravity. We think it's related to mass, more gravity. But what if it's an electrical effect? What if gravity could change with electricity? And at some time, some body came into our solar system, changed the charge on the Earth, thereby changing our gravity, and the dinosaurs fell down. Just a thought. And then, therefore, the Yucatan, this crater that they think they've dated to 65 million years old, I can't remember the name, starts with a T, but it might have been where the thunderbolt came down and excavated out the crater. Chicxulub crater.
Right.
Okay, enough of that, right? So there's a bunch of guys doing experiments, and they're playing in their laboratory, and they're trying to recreate these things. Here we see in the lab where they created these little blueberries that we found on Mars, these little round spherical shapes all over. This is showing how dune or mesas could be built. This is showing what we think is transmutation of elements over here in a clay formation. There's a lot of experimenting going, but there's no money for this. This is not conventional theory. These people are doing this on their own, pretty much. And unfortunately, a lot of this experimentation, a lot of the results just don't get enough. We need lab time. It'd be great to have a spectrometer and be able to go out and look at some of these geological formations and go back and take them to a laboratory and see if the elements change, see if transmutation is going on. I really wanted to put more in about Tesla. Tesla was all about electricity when he built Wardenclyffe. This thing was not sitting on the surface. It actually there's a spiral staircase that goes down this thing. It's anchored into the water table. He fully believed that the Earth was charged electrically, that he could pump that up, and he could give everyone free electricity. And the bankers said, well, I don't see how we're going to make money on that, so we'll just burn it down. But Tesla, a lot of what Tesla says about atoms, about electricity, very much fits the electric universe. If you look at the world around us, all of our electricity generation, our generators were based on the ideas of Tesla. If you look around the world, try to find something that's based on Einstein's relativity. Name one product. And you'll hear people say, GPS. And there was a guy at the Electric Universe Conference who stood up and goes, I work for John Deere. We make the most accurate GPS systems in the world, and nowhere do we use Einstein's equations. So compare the two scientists. One was a theoretical guy. He sat there and did mind experiments, and Einstein's known for his mind experiments. Nikola built the modern world. And so I have a tendency to put a little more faith in Nikola's theories than a lot of these guys with supercomputers. Okay, I'm going to have to skip this part. Okay, I'm going to do this really quick. This is going back to earthing. I mentioned it earlier. This is a Time magazine saying inflammation causes most of our diseases. And that earthing, just by having shoes that have carbon plugs built into the soles, and sleeping on a bed that has silver wires in it that's grounded, or using a mouse pad that's grounded, or when you get off to the airplane and you're out of sync with the local area, to just go out and take your shoes off and walk around in the dirt. Get on the beach, walk on the beach, and you will resynchronize with that area, and the jet lag will not be as severe. And it's really good reading. I really enjoyed his book. So Roy William Wright, I'm sure most of you have heard of him. He created a microscope that was capable of imaging living cells. And then he would subject the living cells to different frequencies of electricity. And he'd watch them, kind of like this glass over here. When you hit the resonant frequency, the glass breaks. Well, the cell would disrupt and fly apart. And so he cured a bunch of people of cancer. That was the wrong thing to do. They took away his lab and basically destroyed him, and most people have never heard of him. This is a great book. If you're a healer, you got to read this book. The Body Electric by Dr. Becker. And it kind of started with him realizing that the salamander and the frog are very similar. But if you cut a salamander's leg off, it will grow it back. If you cut a frog's leg off, it will not grow it back. So he goes, well, what's the difference? So he hooked up a voltmeter, and he cut off a bunch of legs off of little reptiles. And when he cuts the salamander off and the frog off, they both drop in voltage. So from the center of the heart to the wound, you see this jump. And then the salamander would recover and go positive and then come back. Whereas the frog's voltage would just come back slowly. And so he thought, well, that's kind of cool. So he took and he made this is a little battery. It's made with platinum and silver. It's just two metals stuck together. It creates a small battery. He put it into the amputated limb of the frog, and he didn't get a perfect foot back, but he got something to grow back.
Wow.
And so he was really trying to figure out, if someone suffers a serious industrial accident, their arm's all manual, well, we'll just cut it off and let them grow a new one, was his goal. And so this is a little more detail. He shows how it gradually goes. You get this blastoma, which is stem cells. They're undifferentiated. And gradually they differentiate into bones and blood vessels. And so he did a lot of investigation. It's really interesting reading because he's just so matter-of-fact about it. Well, we tried this, and then we saw that, and so we tried this. And it's really good reading. Unfortunately, everyone then figured he was really smart about electricity and its effects on the body. So they asked him to do an investigation into some power lines being built into the Northeast. And he came back and said, no, this isn't good, this is going to hurt people. And so they took away his laboratory and basically ruined his career.
I'm going to have to cut to the end of the chase here.
Okay. Really quickly, we think the mercury in our fillings is the problem because of the chemical reactions. What if we're creating a short circuit in our teeth and we're shorting out an electric circuit? It's not the metal, it's the conductor. Just a thought. This is Jerry Tennant. I like his work. So, this is the last slide. And this is a quote actually by Wallace Thornhill, that from the smallest particle to the largest galactic formation, a web of electrical circuitry connects and unifies all of nature. It organizes galaxies, energizes stars, gives birth to planets, and our own world controls the weather and animates biological organisms. And I like this last sentence. There are no isolated islands in the space or in the universe. And we think of, galaxy only goes gravity only goes one direction. It draws in. But how would astrology work then if you don't have a communication, if it's a two-way thing? It's like our sun is just sitting by itself, completely isolated from everything. And everything goes into it, nothing comes back out. In an electric universe, it's part of the circuit, and everything's connected. Thank you. I just wanted to mention, I do have another presentation on the structured atom and on transmutation, should you guys want to hear it someday. Just a little sales pitch.
Okay, we've got to be out of here about 15 minutes or sooner, and James is going to join us at 95A Bistro, which is right over there. Afterwards, if you want to ask questions, because I've got some that I want to ask, but I don't want to take them now. I want to see who else has any questions. Oh boy, let's start right there.
So can you speak to any impact that the fact that
Hello.
Can you speak to the impact of any of the fact that our universe rotates and is moving through space?
Our
Galaxies.
galaxies moving through space?
And also rotating as it moves through space.
Yeah, actually, I tried to find a picture of this, and they show pictures. I showed the picture of the web with all the galaxies. They actually show that they believe they're lined up, their axis is lined up along these lines.
Which axis?
The axis of the galaxy points at is lined up alongside. It's rotating, and it's actually creating a helical shape as it goes, along with all of our planets. They really aren't staying in one place. They're actually going like this, like a corkscrew.
And does that have an impact then on your theory, the electrical?
I wouldn't say I've heard of anyone really speak of an impact of it. I know they speak about the planets and their helical motion, and our sun's helical motion as it goes through, and then it gets more complicated, smaller and smaller, as having an effect, but not the galaxy as a whole. Yes, sure.
I hear from David Wilcox and others about the solar flash. What do you think of that? Is this tied into what you...
Haven't heard of it. A solar flash, no. I don't listen to David very often.
Put your hand over the head here. We're getting a little feedback.
Regarding the Birkeland currents
Yes, ma'am.
and the ribbons of plasma, has anyone done work looking at the Earth grid line structure and the quality of energy moving through those ribbons around our planet?
Like ley lines kind of thing? Or
Sort of, not like...
not a lot. They talk about the telluric currents, which are known by conventional science, large electric currents under the surface of the Earth. But I've never seen anyone try to correlate it to the actual ley lines or to grid lines.
Yeah, the geometric structure, it's very mathematical.
I have seen
Hartmans and Bankers.
there's a guy named Bruce Laybourne who talks about it's something dodecahedron. It's a shape built inside the Earth that's similar to a platonic solid. It's kind of oblong, and so I heard a few discussions along those lines about geometric shapes being the cause of some of, or being the underlying structure to some of these types of currents.
Okay. I was wondering, because I work with the quality of the energy within the grid lines and changing it so it's safe in an environment. It sounds like a lot of the plasmic style.
One thing I've heard from the organizers...
Explain what's happening, because I'm doing this stuff, but I don't know why.
The organizers say, we're already taking on every branch of science. Let's not throw in aliens and, a lot of other even further out science. And so they intentionally do. So, on the dinner table, we talk about everything, but the presentations are not allowed to go there sometimes because...
So we won't go there, that's fine.
Well, I don't really have a good answer for you about what you asked me.
Yeah, that means
Check
it doesn't
over
matter.
there. Yeah, I don't know.
All right, another question? I've got one.
Yeah.
You said that we've never seen a black hole, and yet they've observed suns or stars moving very quickly around something that can only be explained by a very, very high level of gravity around that black hole. How do you describe that in the
I've
electric
seen the
universe?
pictures you're talking about. They're showing stars moving around the center of the galaxy, our galaxy.
They're coming in like this and
they
shooting
come in and
around something you cannot see.
I haven't heard that addressed by anybody. I would say that you could explain that through electric fields also, but I haven't heard anyone try to do that.
There's your homework.
Okay.
Is it a coincidence that today is the inferior conjunction of Venus on the day of your speech where you show the exact
Oh, it is. No, not actually. I knew that actually this week. 2 days ago, Pluto crossed the ecliptic.
Well, Venus is directly between us and the sun, like
Okay.
right now, exactly now. Should we be worried about being blasted by
Well-
a Brooklyn current?
These type yes.
Given the elevation we're currently at, do you believe we are at a severe risk? Giving you
No, I don't think we are
discussion of the
anymore. I think that the charges have balanced. I think that the planetary motion was largely dictated at electricity at some times, but now that the electricity is balanced, that we are now mainly looking at a gravitational solar system, and I don't think that that's going to happen soon. Or that tail coming out of Venus would actually touch Earth. There are a bunch of theories about the Chicago fires being caused by a comet, by Comet Biela, and we passed through the tail of Comet Biela. And people say that Chicago had the most deaths, the largest deaths in the history of the United States. That very night, Peshtiga, Wisconsin, had more deaths than Chicago. There were like 37 fires in that area that night. There were fires on ships out in the Great Lakes. And it was all over the area. And they talk about, we put out the fire in the church, and then we found out that the next building was burning, and then we found these blue lights dancing on the next building, and then all of a sudden this whole block went up in flame. It wasn't a cow, right? It wasn't Mrs. O'Leary's cow.
So, do you believe in the literalism of disaster, as in bad star causing disaster on Earth?
Yeah, I'm not, this is more planetary than star. If these types of events happen between stars, it's going to be big.
Last question.
Yes, sir.
Tungsten, 1908, the big explosion in northern Siberia that's not identified with anything. They can't find any extraterrestrial material on the ground. Do you think that was an electric universe event?
Yes, I do. But one thing they find with comets is comets have a tendency to blow up. And they really don't know why. And they see these things all of a sudden disintegrate. Shoemaker-Levy comet that hit Jupiter, for some reason, broke into, 13 pieces or something. And it's thought to be that the electric charge within it could no longer sustain, the body couldn't sustain the charge. The comets are thought to go way, way, way out to where there's a low charge. And then as they're coming in, they're picking up charge as they get closer and closer. And as they get more and more charge, there's too much internal pressure from the electric charge, and they blow up, they explode.
Okay. Okay, quick.
Just a quick one. Okay, so you're talking about the craters being created by an electric charge. Where is that charge coming from?
That's a good question. Let me just go into a bigger question. Where is the generator for powering this whole entire universe? Because everything I showed you is the load. I haven't, and I asked that question as many times as I did. It would have to be a close approach of another body, I would think, or that would cause it. But that would cause a lot of craters, and that's a very good question. I'm going to ask that one myself.
Okay, we got to quit. So everybody help us out, leave immediately. If you're going to talk over 95A out in the lobby so they can set up tonight. Thank you, November 30th.